In the beginning of the story, we see two young children named Jack and Brooke who, despite their young age, managed to survive without their parents in an isolated house within a world infected by a zombie virus. This was almost impossible for someone their age due to the great dangers they faced. Then, one day, a couple named Donnie and Melanie arrived driving a car. Jack, noticing their arrival, immediately greeted the two strangers while carrying his toy gun. However, when Donnie asked him where his parents were, Jack preferred not to say anything. For this reason, Donnie simply smiled and left after saying he would return later. That night, Jack quickly secured all the doors and windows to ensure their safety from the zombies, who were always waiting for an opportunity to enter the house, and the two children spent the whole night without any incident. The next morning, Jack and Brooke carried out their usual routine. They ate breakfast, played outside the house, and returned indoors before it got dark. However, a few days later, while they were playing outside the house, Donnie and Melanie returned and, this time, asked about Jack's parents again. Facing the same question once more, Jack decided to lie, saying that his parents had traveled to the city to buy supplies. Hearing that, Donnie and Melanie only smiled while explaining that they would take care of them until their parents returned. And after realizing that the house was fully stocked with food and resources, they decided to stay there for a while. At the same time, it turned out that both of them seemed to know that Jack and Brooke did not actually live with their parents. That night, Jack accidentally overheard a conversation between Donnie and Melanie, who were explaining that they intended to take full control of the house. Therefore, for their safety, Jack took Brooke and their dog named Scott to stay in a secret room, which was a hidden sanctuary that had protected them all this time. The next morning, while having breakfast, Donnie and Melanie began acting as if they were the true owners of the home. Melanie even said she really liked her new family. However, Jack, hearing her words, preferred to remain completely calm while saying that everything would be over before they could even realize it. It turned out that what Jack said was not just a threat, because when night fell, something was about to happen, and it seemed Jack had calculated it. So he moved Brooke and Scott back to the secret room. Meanwhile, in another room, Donnie and Melanie were busy in their own world, unaware that danger would arrive in a short time. At that moment, Melanie, who had just stepped out of the bathroom, was startled by the appearance of several zombies outside the window. Frightened, the couple quickly turned off the lights, thinking the zombies wouldn't be able to see them. However, the bedroom door burst open, and Donnie, realizing something was approaching, pulled out his gun to investigate. However, he discovered Melanie lying on the floor with her mouth bleeding, and immediately afterward, something dragged her away. That was when he realized it was too late for him, as a zombie suddenly attacked him. The next day, a man was seen walking through the area and discovered several traps that had been placed by someone. Then, while following the trail of those traps, he spotted a house located in that remote area. As he looked through the window, the man was suddenly startled by the appearance of Brooke, who was standing right beside him. But before he could react, the stranger was hit by a tranquilizer dart fired by Jack using his modified toy gun. Jack's response showed that it was not the first time the two siblings had dealt with human intruders. When the stranger finally regained consciousness from the effects of the tranquilizer, Jack, who had been waiting for him, immediately began asking him several questions. The man revealed that his name was Dan and that he was a special forces soldier currently on a journey to find his missing wife. Hearing this, Jack was surprised because the man did not resemble the other people who had previously arrived at this place, as he did not ask for their food or medicine, but only wanted to retrieve his equipment, which had been confiscated by Jack while he was unconscious. Because of that, Jack offered him a deal. He told Dan that he was willing to return all his weapons and equipment, but in exchange, he had to repair the house's electric power generator that had broken down. In that conversation, it was revealed that Jack's father was a scientist who had disappeared long ago, while his mother was a national security agent who had recently left to carry out a secret mission. Later, while investigating the house's power source, Dan discovered that the electrical energy generated and collected for the home came from a device that only turned on when someone ran on a treadmill. But then, while they were still talking, Dan was surprised to notice a zombie near the window and quickly grabbed the weight plate that was there before running out to kill it. However, what Dan did angered Jack, who told him he didn't need to go that far, because all the windows in the house were made of bulletproof glass, meaning the zombies couldn't get in. Fortunately, despite being scolded by a child, Dan did not overreact. Instead, he continued to help generate electrical power by walking on the machine. The next day, Jack went outside the house to inspect the traps he had set in the surroundings when he noticed that one of them had successfully captured a zombie. However, at that precise moment, he was forced to hide after hearing the sound of gunshots. Shortly after, 3 hunters arrived. but fortunately they did not notice that Jack was hiding nearby and left the area shortly after. Meanwhile, Dan, who had stayed in the house, grew closer to Brooke, who gradually accepted his presence. However, Jack was different, as he still didn't fully trust Dan, especially given their current situation. Shortly after, Dan was in another room when he discovered a car key while examining the photos and belongings of the children's mother. Thinking he could use the car, he went to the garage to check it out, but unfortunately, when he tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. However, he kept calm and tried to figure out a way to buy time in case he needed to leave the area quickly later on. Sometime later, while spending time outside, Dan accidentally noticed a hidden room that caught his attention, but before he could enter, Jack suddenly appeared and told him to stay out of that place. Later, after spending the rest of the day together, the three went to rest, and because Jack felt that Dan was no longer a threat to them, he did not take Brooke with him to the secret room. However, before falling asleep, he strangely handcuffed his wrist to the bed frame. The next morning, Dan woke up abruptly after hearing a noise, which turned out to be Jack going out to check his traps. He returned to the place he had gone to the previous day and discovered that the zombie trapped earlier was still stuck there. Shortly after, Dan arrived at the scene after having followed him and suspected that the zombie might actually be Jack's mother, since Jack did not kill it. Then, when he intended to kill it, Jack stopped him immediately, which annoyed Dan as he saw no reason to keep the zombie alive. Dan returned to the house alone, where he decided to open the restricted room he had been forbidden from entering earlier. Inside that room, he found a discarded blanket along with walls covered in deep scratch marks, meaning the place had likely been used as an improvised cell to lock up a zombie. In the middle of his confusion, Dan suddenly heard the sound of an approaching car. Realizing that danger was coming, he ran quickly inside and closed all the doors while grabbing Brooke, who was standing near the window. Fortunately, since the house was completely protected, the hunter who came with the car had no choice but to drive away, and at that precise moment, Jack was watching them from a distance. After that tense moment, Jack finally changed his mind and decided to fully trust Dan, knowing that he cared enough to save Brooke. He then returned Dan's weapons to him when Dan decided it was time to resume his journey. A few days before his departure, Dan said he was thinking of taking Jack, Brooke, and Scott with him to keep them safe, expressing that he couldn't stand the thought of leaving them behind in such a dangerous place. However, before Jack could answer him, they were startled by Brooke's scream, and when they checked, they discovered that the hunters from before had returned and taken the girl hostage. In the middle of the tension, Dan was shocked when a hail of gunshots suddenly hit the three hunters standing before them, causing their instant death. It turned out that the shots came from the children's mother, who had finally returned home. However, during the shootout, Dan was accidentally hit by one of the hunters, causing him to collapse unconscious. A few hours later, Dan finally woke up from his faint with his feet tied. However, the rest of his body was completely uninjured and in perfect condition. Then, once he freed himself from the ropes, he walked into the house and reunited with Jack, Brooke, and their mother. As Dan looked confused, the mother explained to him that the reason he was still alive was that he had actually been infected by the virus. She also said that Jack had been infected by the same virus for a long time. She then explained that, while infected people usually lost all brain function and began acting purely on instinct to satisfy their hunger, for some reason there was a rarer case where an infected person's brain remained completely functional, like that of a normal human. However, this rare condition also granted them enhanced physical strength and the ability to heal quickly from their wounds. The main problem was that these rare infected people never knew exactly when they might lose control and transform. And the only reason Jack had been able to track his own transformation all this time was thanks to Scott, who had been specially trained to detect the change by smelling Jack's body odor before the transformation occurred. That was the real reason Jack always handcuffed his wrist to the bed frame every night. And the mysterious room Dan opened earlier was the place where the mother locked Jack up whenever he became uncontrollable. Shortly after, they suddenly received an unexpected visit from several people who turned out to be former colleagues of the mother. The group was led by a man named Brett, who was looking for his missing daughter, Melanie, after she disappeared alongside a man. The reason he visited them was that he suspected Melanie had come to this location. However, as he could not find any proof for his suspicion, he was forced to leave along with all his men. That night, the mother explained to Dan that the surrounding area was under the control of the National Security Agency. She also revealed that the agency had actually predicted the arrival of the zombie virus epidemic a long time ago and, because of this, had secretly built thousands of identical buildings in remote areas like that one as shelters heavily reinforced with various heavy-duty materials and equipped with independent power systems designed to allow humans to live. Upon hearing this, Dan became furious because he believed the agency should have warned the people much earlier, which could have saved countless lives instead of focusing on building thousands of secret shelters. Later, as Dan was preparing to depart, the mother shared that Jack actually suffered from a congenital heart defect. From birth, it had been predicted that Jack would not live past 3 years old. However, her husband, who was one of the first scientists to successfully discover the zombie virus, decided not to give up and tried to find a way to save his son. He eventually decided to take a huge risk by injecting the zombie virus into Jack's body, which transformed him into one of the rare infected individuals with special abilities. Unfortunately, at one point, Jack lost control and bit his own father, causing him to become infected and turn into a zombie. The mother was attacked afterward and had no choice but to shoot her husband to death to save herself and her children. As time went by, Dan became much closer to Jack's family. However, one day, Scott suddenly began barking loudly, making the mother realize that Jack was about to pass into his zombie state. Because of that, she was forced to lock her son in the quarantine room. Once Jack was locked inside, her heart broke as she could only hear the terrifying sounds of banging and scratching coming from behind the heavy door. And for an entire day, the mother and Dan took turns guarding the door, waiting for Jack to recover quickly. The next day, the situation became chaotic when they discovered that Brooke, who was playing outside, had suddenly collapsed on the ground. At that precise moment, the mother quickly realized that Brooke also suffered from the same congenital heart condition as Jack. However, at this critical moment, they couldn't do much due to their limited medical supplies, and to make matters worse, the nearest operational hospital was very far away from them. With no other choice, Dan suggested that they infect Brooke with the virus just as they did with Jack. However, the mother immediately rejected the idea because she believed Jack's survival was a rare miracle that might not happen a second time with Brooke. Therefore, she eventually decided to let Brooke pass away in peace without infecting her with the virus. Sometime after Brooke's death, the mother and Dan discovered that Jack had finally recovered from his transformation. And once they were all reunited again, Dan decided with a heavy heart that it was time to continue searching for his missing wife. And although the mother and Jack begged him to stay, Dan remained steadfast in continuing the search. During his journey, Dan couldn't help but remember the warmth of Jack's family, which made him think about returning to them, until finally one thing made him turn back for food. When he woke up the next morning, he discovered a large number of fresh footprints heading directly toward Jack's house. Sensing that something was about to happen to them, he immediately ran back, and when he arrived, he discovered that the house had been surrounded by Brett and his armed men who had returned to look for Melanie. Inside the house, the mother was tied up because she refused to answer Brett's questions about Melanie's whereabouts, as she actually knew nothing about it. Meanwhile, Dan, who was watching from the outside, managed to slowly infiltrate the building. As he moved through the kitchen, he discovered that Jack was hiding in a safe place. When they met, the boy informed Dan about the number of enemies inside the house, and after learning how many enemies he was about to face, armed with utensils found in the kitchen, Dan began eliminating them one by one, like a shadow of death. Reaching the living room of the house, Dan came face to face with Brett and his remaining men. At that critical moment, with no other options left, Dan unexpectedly cut his own throat with the intention of accelerating his transformation by bleeding out rapidly. Jack and his mother, who immediately understood Dan's intention, took advantage of the opportunity to escape when Brett and his men were caught off guard. Then, as soon as the lights went out, Dan suddenly turned into a zombie and attacked everyone. On the other hand, Jack and his mother could only hide inside the secret room while listening to Dan's terrifying roars, which quickly attracted a massive horde of zombies to enter the house. The next morning, Dan woke up in his human state and discovered that the entire house was completely empty, with bodies scattered everywhere. Then, while searching for Jack and his mother, he found a farewell letter left by her, informing him that she and Jack had traveled north. Upon discovering this news, Dan immediately picked up Jack's favorite toy, before deciding to resume his journey to follow them north.